Today on With the First Pick, we'll give you 12 draft prospects to watch during the college football playoffs. Some names you know, some names you'll need to know because you'll be hearing a lot about them in the coming weeks and months. I'm Ryan Wilson. That's CBS Sports Draft Analyst Josh Edwards filling in for old Rick Spielman, who is still on assignment helping the Jets find their GM and head coach. Rick should be back next week to spread some holiday cheer just before Christmas, but it's always good to have Josh here. Josh, how you doing, man?
Doing pretty well. I'm not going to try to match Rick's energy. I don't feel like I could do that justice. So maybe we'll have, a pretty happy going podcast today.
I was going to thank you for that qualification because energy is one word for it. Grinch is another word. By the way, Claire's producing today, and she always brings up the best in Rick. She laughs at his jokes. That helps. I'm done with that. But Claire's filling in for old Debo, if you're wondering, who's making his way to Happy Valley to cheer on the old Fighting True Allers. Will face off against SMU on Saturday because it's college football playoff time. 12-team playoff, first team ever. So we're going to tell you about some players to know because, that's what we do here. Cover the draft, talk about college, talk about NFL. But first, Josh, 208 days, or excuse me, episode 208, 205 days. I can't count. All right, let's try this again. 208 days. Nope, episode 208. Here we go. All right. Full disclosure, I was a little frazzled before the show because one of the lights went out. So I've been running around, and the blood's still draining from my brain. Episode 208, 126 days until the 2025 NFL draft. I thought I'd say that Rick handles that bit seamlessly, and I thought any monkey could do it. Clearly not. I'm a monkey that can't do it. But all right, we got that out of the way. Let's get to it, Josh. Now, we're going to talk primarily about the games coming up this weekend. If you're listening to this, that means on December 20th, on Friday is the first game, Indiana's at Notre Dame, the Battle of Indiana. And then we'll touch on some of the games of the teams that have bye weeks as well next week, but we'll primarily focus our concerns on some of the players you need to know. They're going to play the next few days here. Let's start with that Friday night matchup, Josh. Indiana at Notre Dame. And here's a guy that Rick and I talked about this year. You may have recommended him to us last year to talk about when he was at Miami of Ohio. Curtis Rourke, the quarterback who's now at Indiana, and he's helped that team get to where they got, and I think surprised everyone on planet Earth, if we're being honest. Rick and I watched him, and I thought he put the ball in harm's way a little too often, and I had some concerns about that, but we only watched him earlier in the fall, and we're going to go back and watch him again. I think he has a Shrine Bowl invite, so we'll get an opportunity to see him there as well in the All-Star game pre-draft process. But you're familiar with Curtis Rourke. So what'd you think of him last year at Miami and then sort of taking the step to the Big Ten in Indiana and helping them do their thing?
Yeah, first of all, went to OU, which is over my left
Ohio?
shoulder here. Got the flag here. It's funny because he was the 5-star review that I turned in for the podcast last year. So you guys did talk about him as a result of me. He is a little bit reckless with the football, but that's also what makes him fun. I think that's what gives them a chance in a lot of these games where you have to be a little bit scrappy against a Notre Dame team that's probably going to be more talented. Ontario native, his brother Nathan Rourke played in the NFL. I believe he's in the CFL now. So yeah, you might get some turnover-worthy plays, but he plays some really fun football too. And I think that's kind of what makes this college football playoff environment so fun is you've got Indiana, you've got Notre Dame, a couple of in-state schools battling there for the state. We could have some inclement weather. So it's going to be a fun opening week for college football playoff. And I think Rourke is the type of player that kind of epitomizes that level of fun that we're expecting.
Yeah, my bad for saying Miami when it's Ohio, number one, Ohio University, not only home of formerly of Curtis Rourke, but also of Peter King and Josh Edwards. So, again, I'll calm down. When old people get frazzled, it takes them a minute to get their wits about them. So we're getting there. But, yeah, okay, I'm glad you agree about the harm's way stuff. And he'll get a test. The Ohio State game was a test, and this will be another test for him because that Notre Dame defense has some dudes on it. One of the guys that we talked about a good bit last season, 2023 season, talked about him a little bit this season, especially over the summer. And he's been a little banged up, but he's expected to play, I think. And that's Harold Cross III, the interior defensive lineman, who I absolutely love. He's not one of the 12 names on this list. But if he's out there and he's anything close to healthy, he's going to be a problem. And that's something Curtis Work and that offensive line's going to have to deal with for Indiana. But another name I wanted to bring up in this game, on the other side of the ball, he plays on defense with Harold Cross, is Xavier Watts, the safety. And Xavier Watts is an absolute dude. Plays half his snaps at free safety, plays a third of the snaps in the box. He can play in the slot. Former wide receiver in high school, has 6 interceptions this year, 4 pass breakups. He dropped another 2 interceptions, so that number could be even higher. I wouldn't say he had his coming out party, but he made an impact in that USC game in 2023 when Caleb struggled so much in the first half through those 3 picks. And this is sort of my crutch comp for guys that play like this, and there aren't a lot of guys like this, but I gave him the old Talanoa Hufanga comp. He's probably a better athlete. I think he gets drafted higher. Hufanga went on day 3 because in the draft process, he was considered a little stiff. He's played at a high level when he's been healthy. But there is not much that Xavier Watts can't do. And I absolutely love this kid, and it was a lot of fun to watch. I think he is headed to the Senior Bowl. I'll double-check that, but he has that. I think he's accepted that invite. And he's going to be look, if you're a ball hawk playing against Curtis Work, you're going to have some opportunities is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no question. Bronco Nagurski winner in 2023. He's had 12 interceptions over the past 2 seasons, 2 forced fumbles. It's a guy that just turns the ball over. And that's something that we often see translate to the next level. Yeah, absolutely. Typically players that get a lot of interceptions in college often get a lot of interceptions in the NFL as well. So that's something that's going to be very appealing to NFL teams as we go through this process. One thing that's just looking through True Media, some of the stats, he did have a 17.2 missed tackle rate in 2024, which often is a result of that energy that you spoke of. Sometimes gets a little bit too high, has to do a better job of breaking his feet down in space and making a square tackle. That's something that a lot of guys can correct. But yeah, Watts is a guy that is incredibly athletic. He's all over the field and has a tendency to make turnover-worthy plays.
Yeah, in fact, some notes I made against the run, especially. He plays like he's shot out of a cannon, but he sometimes takes bad angles. He's a thumper though when he hits you, but sometimes he'll just try to throw a shoulder at you, and runners can sometimes bounce off that because he's not wrapping them up. But to your larger point, there is a lot to like about Xavier Watts, and you'd rather say "whoa" than sick him, as BMAC likes to say when you're talking about defensive players getting after it. All right, so that's the Indiana Notre Dame game. 2 guys down already. That'll be 2 fellas to watch on Friday night. I mentioned Harold Cross, the third. If he's out there, keep an eye on him. Benjamin Morrison is another highly touted prospect for Notre Dame, but he's been out for the season for a while. And then we'll have to see what his pre-draft process looks like health-wise. But we were talking a lot about him over the summer, no doubt about it. Next up, Saturday's action, Clemson at Texas. Which Clemson team is going to show up? Which Texas team is going to show up? Let's start with your guy. And this is a guy that I absolutely love. Jahdae Barron, plays safety. My perhaps overzealous comp for him is Brian Branch. He's not as thick as Brian Branch, but it's just in terms of his being a fly buzzing all over the field, making plays. I like what he does here. But tell me what you think about Jahdae Barron, the defensive back. You can line him up just about anywhere, outside, slot, plays star, off ball. Jahdae Barron for the Longhorns here.
Well, first and foremost, it's the versatility. Just like you were discussing there, he's played in the slot, he's played safety, he's played all over the field. And I think teams that need a slot corner are going to be drawn to him through this process. It's a good time to be a team that is in that market because last year we saw Andrew Phillips from Kentucky. We saw Mike Sanderstill from Michigan. Both of those players played exceptionally well during their rookie seasons, continue to play well. I think Jahdae Barron is a player that can have a similar impact. He's got great instincts. He makes, he trusts his eyes in zone coverage, does a good job of helping his teammates when somebody is not in his zone. So just a really instinctual player, but 8% missed tackle rate in 2024, which is a relatively low number. That's about average for what you would expect out of that position. 8 interceptions over the past 3 seasons. Again, talking about that ball production translating to the NFL. He has certainly had that during his time with the Longhorns. Just a good leader, communicator, somebody that's going to help in run support. So I just think you're getting a well-rounded player that's going to be able to step in and start as a rookie from day one.
It certainly feels like it. And we'll go through the process here, and let's back up just to the two players previously. Curtis Rourke, he feels like a day 3 guy to me now. Maybe that changes. What are your thoughts on where he gets drafted?
Yeah, I would say that's probably accurate. I think it's more likely, day 3 to undrafted than for him to get into that day 2 range. One thing I will say, he has not thrown more than 5 interceptions in any of the past 3 seasons. So as much as it kind of comes across reckless, he is somebody that has not had a lot of interceptions. So maybe it's smart, risk taking. I don't know, but I would say probably day 3 to undrafted free agent for him.
And I know some teams like him, which is why I pause and I'll go back. But I'm with you on that. What about Xavier Watts? Because I think for me, he's a day 2 guy all day long, unless he goes out there and runs a 4.9 or something.
Yeah, I think he's hovering kind of on that day 2, early day 3 kind of range. For me, he's got to get that missed tackle rate down a little bit, but no question, an athletic player that has had a lot of ball production throughout his career.
About Barron, I've had Barron going to some of my mock drafts just because I love the versatility that you talk about and the athleticism
Yeah.
and the ball skills.
I think you're talking about possibly top 50.
Yep.
I think top 50, maybe you get into the later portion of day 2. I think that's probably the sweet spot for him.
Yeah, no, that feels right. And different teams have different needs and like players differently, but I think we're on the same page with that. Another player in that Clemson Texas game, going to stay on the Texas side of the ball. We're going to stay on the defense. I'm done talking about Quinn Ewers. I sort of liken it to, your son's the best player on the field, Little League, and then he goes out there and just strikes out every time. You can't figure out why. That's Quinn Ewers. I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. Let me put it that way. So I would like for Quinn to have a big game so we can have something positive to talk about. All right, but I instead am going to talk about Alfred Collins, number 95, plays defensive tackle. And you're living in a world where you're backing up Byron Young and Tavondre Sweat. That's not a bad world to live in terms of once you get your opportunity, taking advantage of it. Those guys, one was a first-round pick, one was a second-round pick. And the second-round pick might have been a first-round pick if not for off-field issues. He's playing like a first-round pick now. One of the most amazing plays I've seen this season, and perhaps this is hyperbole and recency bias, but the strip of Joe Burrow and then the subsequent stiff arm by Tavondre Sweat as he was rumbling down the field as a defensive tackle. Not only did that make me chuckle, but it was feat of athleticism rarely seen on planet Earth. All right, Alfred.
Yeah, that was
Collins.
crazy. I think that was the heaviest player to ever carry a football. I think I saw that stat floating around here over the past week. So, and he had a purpose when he got the football. This was not a player that was trying to get a couple of yards back. He was trying to take it to the house. And I think when you're on the other side of the ball, not expecting to see a player of that size rumbling at you, it's kind of there's a lot of business decisions that had to be made there, Ryan.
I think a lot of
but
business
to their credit,
decisions
they
were
brought him down.
I think a lot of business decisions were made for them by Tavondre Sweat. I don't know who was on the receiving end of that stiff arm. I'm not going to look it up because I'm not going to call them out because they had no chance. It could have been Hulk Hogan for all I cared. It was not going to end any differently. And it's funny that he's the heaviest player to ever carry the ball because you think about Refrigerator Perry back in the mid 80s. I'll think about it because you guys weren't alive. But I don't even know if he was 300 pounds. He was like hovering around there, and everyone thought he was like morbidly obese. And it turns out he would be svelte in today's NFL. Alfred Collins, he's listed at about 315-ish. He is a juiced up interior defensive lineman. Sometimes line him up over the tackle, and he has the power to bull rush the tackle or the center for that matter. It doesn't matter where you put him into the quarterback's lap, but his game is sort of shooting gaps and using his hands to win. I'm laughing because he has a spin move that he loves to lean on. It is consistently consistent because he wins with it a lot. High motor player. It's weird when you call big guys sideline to sideline guys, but he is going to run down the ball no matter where it is through the whistle. And I love that about him too. A lot of things to like about Alfred Collins. Waited his turn and is now balling out. And they're going to need a big game from him in that defense against Clemson on Saturday. But I think he's a day 2 guy all day long, and that feels like worst case. You had a chance to watch Alfred?
Yeah, I'm a fan. I actually watched him in 2021. I can't even remember
Look
what
at you.
year he was at that point in time. So I think looking at my notes, he's probably the player that I have notes on the longest. But I thought we saw real progress this year. You see those heavy hands that enable him to deconstruct blocks. He can stack and shed blockers. He's obviously, a big contributor in the run defense. That Texas defensive line this year has a lot of talent. You've got Vernon Broughton right next to him. The pass rushers have a rotation with Barron Sorrell, who is an edge rusher in this draft class that is going to get drafted. Ethan Burke is a guy from Austin, Texas, who has been productive for them as well. Colin Simmons is a freshman that tested off the charts as a high school recruit. He was one of the best recruits in the nation. He's going to be a guy we talk about in the next couple of years. And you've got Trey Moore. So it's just a rotation that they're able to throw these guys at you in waves, and all of them are productive. But what we see in the middle with Collins and Broughton kind of enables those guys to take those one-on-one opportunities and get after the quarterback. So like what I've seen from Alfred Collins this year, I think you're talking in the right range. Similar to Jahdae Barron, probably, top 50 back end of day two. Somewhere in that range. He's a guy that I'm glad you brought up because I was kind of torn on him and Barron when we were discussing who to talk about on this podcast.
Yeah, I'm trying to hit on some guys that we haven't sort of run into the ground at this point. Again, 126 are the number of days until the draft. I got that right finally. But so I was excited to talk about him because he's been flashing all season, and it's down to the nitty gritty now that they're in the playoffs here. Saturday's opening game. That Clemson, Texas game is at 4 p.m. Eastern time, but at noontime in Happy Valley, where Debo will be, no doubt, shirtless and face painted and cheering wildly for Drew Aller. SMU faces the Nittany Lions. And your guy, my guy, everyone's guy, America's tight end, Tyler Warren, is who you're going with here. Trying to think off the top of my head, I don't know if anyone helped themselves more in the draft over the last 5 or 6 months than Tyler Warren. High school basketball player. Was talking to his high school basketball coach a couple weeks ago, who's a good friend with one of my good friends from college. They grew up together in Richmond, Virginia, and that's where Tyler grew up. And Tyler's 6'5", 6'6". We'll see how tall he actually is. High school, he's about 230, 235. And I was talking to the coach. I said, "So what did he play, like power forward?" He goes, "No, he played center." And he's the only reason we can compete with the they weren't a great program. They're the suburban school, and but they would go play the city schools. And he said Tyler was the reason that we'd be hanging in there. Otherwise, we'd lose 20, 30 points to those guys. And he said Tyler's the greatest kid ever. So it's a fun story. And the athleticism on the basketball court certainly translates what we've seen this season so far.
No question. I think a lot of that credit goes to offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki, who has done a good job of moving him around the package. He's played quarterback. He's lined up out wide. He's been in line. He's been detached. He's been an H-back. He's been everywhere that you could take
Center.
snaps from that Penn State offense. Yeah, he's lined up there. So that's a testament to the way that they have used him this season. I think it's definitely impacted his draft stock for the better. And when you hear this versatility, you do think he's probably going to be like 6'3", 6'4", on the smaller side, because that's typically what we expect from those H-back profiles. This is a guy that is legitimately 6'6", 257 pounds, great range to catch the football. You can line him out wide or keep him in the block. I think he's shown improvement in that area over the past year. I think he's a better blocker, specifically in line. Still needs to improve a little bit in terms of blocking in space, pulling across the formation, stuff like that. But his catch radius is insane. He's got soft, strong hands at the same time. He had a 1.8% drop rate in 2024. So he's not dropping the football. The football is never hitting the ground if Tyler Warren is the target. But you talked about
last week against Oregon.
Well, yeah.
I made that note for Debo.
Timing could have been a little bit better there. But
right.
You talked about Alfred Collins waiting for his moment to step into the starting lineup. And the same has been true of Tyler Warren. You look at all the tight ends that have come through that program. Zach Kuntz had to transfer out to Old Dominion. Theo Johnson, Pat Fryermuth, Brenton Strange. So he had to wait for his moment, and he has made the most of it this season. A little bit high-waisted, in and out of his cuts. You see that a little bit, but 88 receptions for 1,062 yards, 6 touchdowns this season. I mean, that's crazy. And that's why you're seeing him being projected in the first round. I think teams that are going to be in the market for him include the Chargers. I think you'll see the Broncos, the Seahawks. That middle to later portion of the first round, I think, is where we probably see him come off the board. But if I remember correctly, I think Rick took him to the Colts in the top half of the first round in our most recent mock draft. So there's a lot of support for him around the league.
Yeah, Rick's a big fan, and Colson Loveland, who's the other tight end that we talk about out of Michigan as a first-round prospect, has not had the benefit of Drew Aller's been good, but if Drew Aller played on Michigan, that team would probably still be playing right now.
And Drew Aller announced that he's coming back for next season as well. I'm sure that was planned for him to make that announcement before the college football playoff, give them a little bit more energy, maybe excitement going into that game, that they don't have to worry about a decision from him. But he was going to be in the mix for that third quarterback in this draft class, and now he's returning to Happy Valley.
Yeah, and actually, funny you mentioned that. If you guys didn't catch it on Tuesday, I spoke with Coop Patagna at 247, who is knees deep in portal stuff and transfer news, and we talked a little bit about Drew Aller's decision to come back, because Debo's contention is that what if they play 3 more games and he balls out in 3 games like he's Joe Flacco during that Super Bowl run? Then what do? Should you have announced that you're coming back? And then, of course, Bo Prabula is transferring out, so he won't be available to sort of wildcat quarterback they use occasionally. Debo was okay with that, in case you're wondering. Abdul Carter, the aforementioned Drew Aller, Nick Singleton, the running back, Katron Allen, the other running back. Those are also guys you can keep eyes on that we've talked about and we'll be talking about in terms of the draft process. I'm glad that Drew Aller is going back. I think he'll be in the QB1 conversation, no doubt about it, next year, but maybe you feel differently. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, going to look at the last game on Saturday night, Tennessee at Ohio State, and some guys to watch right after this.
Sunday, the pressure is on. And when the stakes are high, the elite players shine the brightest. Now that's a CBS Sports Sunday. At halftime of the 425 games, catch a preview of the new series Dexter Original Sin, now streaming on the Paramount Plus with Showtime plan.
All right, let's get to it. Triple header on Saturday, in addition to a doubleheader in the NFL. So if you're looking for football, Saturday's your day. Good luck convincing your family that you're not going to help put the tree up or buy presents or whatever it is you got planned, because you got to watch some football. That's going to be my excuse, Josh. All right, here we go. Tennessee at Ohio State. A lot of pressure on Ryan Day and the Buckeyes, and mostly Ryan Day, because this is the quintessential dream team that looked like the dream team of the Eagles, not the dream team of the 1992 Olympics, back when, who was that, Vince Young and Michael Vick and all those guys. Nnamdi Asomugha just pulled that one out. That team didn't quite materialize in Philadelphia. We'll see what happens with the Ohio State team, but Ryan Day, perceived or otherwise, is under some pressure. Number 9, Tennessee, they got some dudes on defense. Got some guys on offense as well. But we've talked about Harold Pierce. Is that Harold Pierce?
James Pierce.
James Pierce. Harold Perkins. I get Harold Perkins and James Pierce's name mixed up all the time. Harold Perkins, LSU. James Pierce, edge rusher, Tennessee. We've talked about him a lot. We're not going to talk about him here. We are going to talk about, and Josh submitted this name to the old with the first pick suggestion box, and I'm glad he did, because I've actually had him going in my first round, the last mock draft, and that may be a little ambitious, but sometimes you watch a guy and you're like, oh my God, I love the way this kid plays. He gets after it. He's a high motor, high intensity, never quit type of player, and that's Omar Norman Lott, who plays inside. They'll put him outside. And I'll just tell you this, Josh, before you give me your thoughts on Norman Lott. My comp for him, watching him play, Braden Fisk. Like, I think he plays. He may not be the best athlete on the field, but good luck stopping him if he has something in his sights, because he's going to get it.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Fisk, because there are times where, so Norman Lott plays to the whistle, but sometimes he plays beyond the whistle, which is something you could have said about Fisk as well. So
yeah.
For that reason, the comparison is fitting. But you're looking at a 6'3", 315-pound defensive lineman, began his career at Arizona State, somebody that has good strength. He does a good job stacking blocks, deconstructing blocks. plays with good leverage, 9.5 sacks over the past 2 seasons. So you typically don't see that kind of sack production from an interior defensive lineman. 22% pressure rate, according to True Media. So this is a guy that, despite his size, is not just a run stuffer. He's somebody that's going to get on the hips of the opposing interior offensive linemen and create pressure on the opposing quarterback, get them off their spot. That's what you want to do because it is the fastest path to the quarterback. So when you're seeing that type of pass rush production from Omar Norman Lott, that's what allows him to be a potential top 50, but certainly day 2 pick in this draft class, because you're not looking at a player that can just help your run defense. He's somebody that can impact the passer as well.
And that's the thing. You start working through these guys, and it's what I'm doing now is we're getting the acceptance letters from the Shrine Bowl players and the Senior Bowl players, and you're like, oh, this defensive line class is insanely deep. We talk about the lack of depth at offensive tackle and, of course, quarterback, but edge rushers and defensive linemen, if you need those guys, this is the draft for you. And I keep coming back like, okay, this guy looks like a day 2 pick. This guy looks like a day 2 pick. And I think there are a lot of them because that's where the depth is. And I think realistically, second round is probably where Norman Lott is right now. Braden Fisk went in the second round. He probably should have been a first-round pick. So, we have all these benchmarks that you need to reach physically and this, that, and the other, your measurements and whatnot. But I'll be interested to see how Norman Lott grades out in terms of height, weight, and whatever numbers he puts up at the Combine or his Pro Day or wherever, because watching him play, it's hard to think that he's not one of the most active interior defensive linemen in this draft class. So we have a couple more guys. Okay, good. I was just looking at the roster of guys we have to talk about here. And I'll mention some other names too. You talk about James Pierce and then Ohio State. Good Lord, there's a laundry list of guys we could talk about. Josh Simmons isn't playing, but he is declared for the draft, the left tackle that we've spent some time, Josh and I, talking about on the podcast on HQ. Tyleik Williams, the interior defensive lineman. I like Norman Lott a little bit better, but Tyleik Williams is going to get drafted pretty high as well. Tuimoloau and Sawyer, the 2 edge rushers that came back this year. Donovan Jackson, the interior offensive lineman, who's going to get drafted pretty high. 2 running backs, and Trevion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, of course. And then David Igbinosun, the cornerback, who I believe is returning to school. I don't know if that's official, but I think he's leaning that way. He's a good physical cornerback, maybe a little too handsy at times, but if he goes back to school, a little more reps for him. Cornerback who's not returning to school, I don't think, and will have an opportunity to prove himself Saturday and perhaps beyond, is Denzel Burke. I've been watching Denzel Burke for a few years now, and it feels like one year he's red hot, and the next year he's struggling. This is one of those struggling years. The Oregon game is going to stick out, and that's what he's going to be questions about, because he had a tough time against whoever they lined up out there, whether it was Tez Johnson or Evan Stewart. But he's long, and he is physical, and he will play well in run support. I don't know him, so I can't speak for him, but I do wonder at times if he battles with just confidence, because sometimes he does things that look like a first-round corner, and other times he looks like he's battling, demons, for lack of a better word, in terms of when he's dropping into coverage and defending the pass. So hopefully he can start flashing here these next few games, plural, if they get that opportunity, because I have him in the 3rd round right now, and it's teetering. Like, it could go in one of 2 directions, and hopefully goes in the right direction. But I need to see a little bit more consistency from him, Josh.
I agree with that. Consistency is something that we've been asking from him for a couple of years. He was supposed to be the next guy up at Ohio State. They had to supplement that unit this past year in the transfer portal, as you mentioned, with Igbinosun, who is a lengthy cornerback in his own right, transferred in from Ole Miss. We just need to see more consistency out of him. He did have 2 interceptions this year, or has 2 interceptions this year. So the ball production has been fine, but when you look at the cornerback position, historically, it's very volatile. One year you're up, one year you're down. Sometimes you're up weekly, sometimes you're down weekly. It's a mental game when you're playing that position, because sometimes you're going to be beaten. You're at a disadvantage when you're playing against opposing offenses that are spreading the ball out, throwing 40 times a game, and you don't know what the play call is. You don't know what the receiver is going to do. So you're at a disadvantage inherently as a cornerback. And I think how you deal with those ups and downs is ultimately what dictates what kind of a professional career that you're going to have. And NFL teams are going to need to know what kind of a guy Denzel Burke is throughout this process. to invest such high draft capital on him. But I think he's an incredibly talented player. When he's on his game, he's one of the better cornerbacks in this draft class. We just need to see that more consistently.
Well, he's going to get some opportunities in this facing this Josh Heupel offense, because they're going to spread out the wide receivers to next to the inline or the sideline, excuse me. And it's going to be a lot of one-on-one situations, and he'll have a chance. Brew McCoy is one of the wide receivers to keep an eye on at Tennessee. He was injured, I believe, last year. He had that serious injury. Came to US. He was at USC before that. He's a big, long wide receiver. So, all right, Denzel, ball out. So I want to see that. And finally, a young man that hasn't had much in the way of inconsistency, battled injury last year, but this year he's been fun. He's not Marvin Harrison Jr. He's not Garrett Wilson. He's probably closer to Jackson Smith and Jigba, but a little bigger in terms of physical attributes, speed and shiftiness, all that. But I love me some Emeka Egbuka. And I think you had him going to the Steelers in your latest mock draft. And
I did.
Look, man, he might be the 50th best player on the average NFL teams board. I would give serious consideration to taking him in picks 20 to 32 if you need a wide receiver. Number one, the wide receiver class isn't that deep. And number two, he is maybe the most reliable wide receiver in this class. He's going to be where you want him to be. He's not a number one right now. He's a number two. And the Steelers don't have a number two. They have a number one, and they have a number 5, 6, and 7. No disrespect to Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson, and just traded for Mike Williams, but that's just a reality. I think Emeka Egbuka can bridge the gap on any offense, but the Steelers could desperately use him. If they could trade for him right now, I would imagine they'd give it serious consideration. Why'd you have Emeka on this list?
Well, I think he's just consistent. He's a good route runner. He gets in and out of his breaks pretty quickly. 3.7% drop rate in 2024, according to True Media. So he's pretty sure-handed. Lines up in the slot 71.8% of the time. So you're not getting this traditional X wide receiver. You're getting a guy that's going to complement that player should you already have one in place. And I think that's why Pittsburgh has been such an intriguing possibility, because I think he fits or complements George Pickens well in a couple of ways. Pickens is very volatile in terms of his personality. Egbuka is a little bit more even keel, calm, that type of wide receiver. And their skill sets as receivers kind of match that. Pickens is the downfield big play attack for that Pittsburgh offense. And Egbuka would be this complementary working underneath with Pat Freiermuth, taking advantage of zone coverage type of wide receiver. So I think he fits that really well. That's why he's been a very popular pick to them for me in mock drafts over the past 3 or 4 months, however long we've been doing them now. But as you mentioned, he's never been the go-to guy. It's been Jeremiah Smith. It's been Marvin Harrison Jr. And I think you have to understand that when you pick a player like him, because he's not going to be somebody that just saves your offense, but he's somebody that can be a very valuable contributor should you already have a player like CeeDee Lamb or George Pickens in place.
Yeah, I was trying to think. Claire, in case you're wondering, Josh is giving, advice on the Steelers' mental state, their wide receivers. He's a Browns fan, so he's dealing with his own issues.
Well, yeah, I don't want to talk about the Browns, Ryan.
I was trying to come up with a Browns receiver. I suppose number 2 to Jerry Jeudy. It took me a minute to get there, but there we are. In full disclosure, I would have been fine with the Steelers getting Jerry Jeudy in the offseason. I actually like him coming out. Obviously, like Russ Wilson, Denver Broncos wasn't a great fit for Jerry Jeudy. He's one of the few bright spots on that offense. Nick Chubb's hurt again, unfortunately. He may be done in Cleveland. I don't want to make this a Browns podcast because no one wants that. Miles Garrett's great, but other than that, I don't tell you, Josh.
It's a lot to work on
for Christmas.
A lot of room for improvement.
I just beg that you don't raise your 2 sons as Browns fans, but I don't think you're going to keep that advice. You do you. Claire, are you a Bears fan?
Unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Well, at least you got a quarterback.
Right. But we have owners who don't know how to run a team. So
we have a lot of Bears fans at CBS, and you guys are reading from the same script. It's
the same thing every year, over and over.
It's a story as old as time. All right, let's go to something a little bit more uplifting. Let's go to New Year's Eve. And that's the first time we'll get to see Boise State, who have a bye, and we'll see who they play based on what happens this weekend here. But Josh took the low-hanging fruit there. The only person in Idaho that's going to get drafted, I don't know if that's true. The only person in Idaho that's going to get drafted in the first round, I feel comfortable with that. Ashton Genty, Boise State's pride and joy. At the Heisman ceremony, as he should have been, fared pretty well, lost to Travis Hunter. There's no shame in that, of course. But he was a fun watch this year, and good luck tackling this young man. I would take him in the top 15. I don't care what the conversation is about running backs and whatever. He's not asked to catch the ball a lot, but I've been saying it, and I will continue to say it. If you go watch his receptions, his targets, he can catch, and he can do damage in space. And I think he's in the Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson category. What do you think of that, Josh?
Yeah, I agree. In a recent article for CBSSports.com, you, me, Mike Renner, Chris Trapasso all touched on how good of a prospect Genty is compared to some of those other guys. You know, how does he stack up to Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs or Saquon Barkley to go back even farther? I think he's probably a little behind Bijan Robinson for me, but he's ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs because he's a better pure runner. Not quite as explosive, but I think he's a better runner than Gibbs was coming out of Alabama. You mentioned his contributions in the pass game. This past year was down pretty significantly from what we had seen the prior year, because 2023, he had 43 receptions for 569 yards, 5 touchdowns, and more impressively, 0 drops. So this is a player that is a dynamic runner. He's somebody that allows blocks to materialize before making his cuts. He does a good job working laterally before accelerating upfield. He's a good pass catcher. Something that is not talked about enough is his willingness to contribute in pass protection. He's not somebody that has to come off the field on third down because you need a running back in there that's going to stand and protect. He's somebody that is more than capable to be that shield of your quarterback. So you don't have to take him off the field ever. He's just a very well-rounded player. 38.8% tackle avoidance rate in college football this season. According to True Media, that's third highest among players with 200-plus carries. He's got great size to be a feature back, 5'9", almost 220 pounds, which is kind of that threshold that you look for.
Here, hold on a second. Let me run this by you, because it's funny you mentioned that, because that's going to be my follow-up. Our colleague Amanda Guerra called several Boise State games this fall, and I think she said she's 5'4", and she said that Ashton's not much taller than her. And I actually asked Rick. I said, Rick, what do you feel about a first-round running back that's 5'6.5" or something? He said he didn't want to talk about it. So I don't think he's going to be 5'9". So are you drafting the guy in the first round that's sub 5'7"?
Sub 5'7" is pushing it. At 5'7", I probably would have been comfortable because I believe that much in the talent. And I think at the end of the day, some team is still going to believe in him enough to make that type of investment. I care more about the 220-ish pound range to, have the size, the thick lower body build to run through some of those arm tackles, drive your feet on contact in the run game. That's more important to me. But if it's true that he is that much different than what he is listed, that's going to be a talking point throughout the pre-draft process. I mean, we're going to know at the NFL Combine. So one way or another, we will have our answer here in the next couple of months. And, one thing about the media is I'm sure that'll be swept under the rug. It's not going to be talked about by every outlet possible. No. It's not going to be a narrative that everybody hammers home for the 2 months after the Combine.
No.
But that's interesting. I didn't notice that on tape, but if that's true,
because he stands up in the backfield. That's why he stands up.
True. Yeah. And he was trying to be Michael Myers. He was impersonating Michael Myers. That was a big thing around Halloween because of his stance pre-snap. He kind of has that ominous kind of lingering stance before the snap. So a little shout out to Michael Myers there from Ashton Genty.
Also, just to be clear, I don't know how tall Ashton is. I don't know if he's 5'9", based on conversations with Amanda, who stood next to him and interviewed him a couple times as someone who was 5'4", and she was probably wearing boots or something. So we'll find out. I hope he's 6'2". I don't care.
And he had a very big game against Oregon, and Oregon has a couple of defensive linemen that we've discussed and will discuss. I believe one is on the list here coming up. Another one there at Oregon is Derek Harmon, who is a player that is highly regarded by a lot of people in this process as well. So he's done it against good competition, averaged 7.3 yards per carry this season. But nonetheless, we all know that NFL talent evaluators love their size metrics, your
Yeah.
height, your weight, how much you can bench press, how fast you can run, all that kind of stuff. So at the end of the day, we talk about the player, but there is a lot of emphasis that's put on those testing measurements at the NFL Combine.
No, I get it. I get in the history of football, only so many players have done this if they were only able to run 4.8, or if they were only 5'6", or if they only had 32-inch arms. And I just caution against this. I say it all the time. I said it all the time to Rick. Don't let that be your Brian Branch or your Braden Fisk. If you like him and you trust it, just draft the kid. Like I said, if he's 6'2" or 5'2", I'm taking Ashton Genty in the first round.
And if that's true, be prepared to see a lot of Doug Martin comparisons, see a lot of first round pick. Gosh, can't even think. The running back for the Jaguars. I'm blanking on his name.
MJD.
MJD, Maurice Jones-Drew. Yeah. You'll see a lot of those comparisons if he is end up, 4'9" or whatever it ends up being.
Yeah, don't overthink it. It's not that not that difficult. All right, let's take one more break in the spirit of short people everywhere, and that includes me. Josh, you're taller than me. Are you 6 feet, Josh?
No, 5'10".
Oh, okay. I thought you were.
So no, we're pretty comparable.
I thought you must have been wearing heels when we were at the combine. All right, that's
you,
fine.
you know me. I like to break out the heels at the combine.
Yeah, you do you. No judgment here with the first pick. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll talk about one more game, the January 1st game between two teams that play on January 1st. That is Oregon and Georgia. We'll talk about that right after this.
Can you feel
Another triple header on January 1st, which feels more in line with traditional bowl game season. Arizona State's obviously playing as well. Cam Scattaboo is the guy we would have talked about if we had mentioned Arizona State player, but we didn't. We talked about him a few weeks ago, and we'll be talking about him a lot, I would imagine, in the coming weeks and months. Let's head on over to Georgia. And Georgia has approximately 457 guys that are going to get drafted this year. See if I can find my list of guys as we get through this. There it is. All right. Malachi Starks, we've talked about. The safety, Jalen Walker, the linebacker / edge guy / put him wherever and you'll have success. We've talked about him. Carson Beck is not going to play, I don't think. Have you heard otherwise?
I have not heard anything definitive, but just some of the comments I heard after that game, I would be surprised if he did.
It sounded like it was a UCL injury, an elbow injury. So do you know what his eligibility is? I cannot find if he has any more college eligibility left. I would like for him to come back. I would imagine he's not coming back.
I have not heard anything to suggest he's considering coming back. The money is pretty good in NIL these days.
Lamborghini for crying out loud.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he would be more than welcome back in Athens. I'm sure he would get a great NIL package. I don't know his eligibility either off the top of my head. But I think the expectation is that he will declare.
Yeah. It's too bad that he can't play if he, in fact, is not healthy enough to do so, because if anyone needed to turn the ship around and start balling out, it would have been Carson Beck. Tate Ratledge, the offensive lineman, he's going to be in the mix. Nazir Stackhouse, we talked about in the offseason, the defensive lineman, the Smile Monday, the linebacker. We haven't talked about it all this season, but we did give him some run during summer scouting. But one guy we've talked a good bit about, one guy that Josh wants to revisit, Mykel Williams, edge rusher. And he's had a pretty good season. And he's drawn some comparisons. I'll give you this comparison in general. I'll give you my comp in a second. Comparisons to Travon Walker, who was previously a Georgia first overall pick of the Jaguars a few years ago, to some consternation because he was sort of a moldable piece of clay that had yet to be a finished product. And he's flashed at times. I don't know if he's flashed first overall pick level yet. Aiden Hutchinson went number 2 in that draft, and Aiden Hutchinson was a layup at the time and still feels like sort of a layup. But Mykel Williams is probably going to be anywhere from 9 to 20. I'd be shocked if he lasts till 20. But he's a juiced up edge rusher that can create all sorts of problems, and we've seen him do that week in and week out.
Yeah, and that's part of a larger narrative in this draft class because I don't think that there are that many bona fide, like top 10 caliber selections. I think on a previous podcast, I talked about wanting to start the draft at number 5 overall because we don't see the types of number 1 overall talents that we are accustomed to seeing. I believe that Travis Hunter Jr. is a great cornerback. I think Will Johnson Jr. is a great cornerback. Johnson, was a little bit banged up this year. He didn't play up to number 1 overall expectations. Hunter, I think Johnson is better when he's healthy at cornerback. I don't think Hunter is a number 1 overall wide receiver, but because of his versatility, he's in that conversation to be the number 1 overall pick. But again, because we lack those true number 1 overall caliber players, including the quarterback position, I think that lends to teams willing to take more risks on players that have athletic profiles and the upside to be something more in the NFL. We're seeing a lot of players talked about in that way through this draft class. Shamar Stewart, a defensive lineman from Texas A&M. We're talking about Walter Nolan, a defensive tackle from Ole Miss, and Mykel Williams. He is a little bit raw. Not quite as raw as Trayvon Walker had been coming out, I don't think. And the thing with Walker, a lot of people were questioning if he was going to be a defensive tackle or an edge rusher. He kind of answered that at the combine because of how well he tested. But I think Williams is a little bit more well prepared to play that edge rusher position. He's a relatively young player. He does a good job of setting the edge, contributing in run defense. Only 11.7% pressure rate this past season, according to True Media, which, is not where you want it to be if you're talking about a player that's a potential top 10 overall selection, but 6'5", 265 pounds. That's somebody that you're excited about because you see his athletic potential. You see the size that he has, and that's why teams are going to take a chance on him. Yeah, he's not where you want him to be at this stage of the process. But when you're stacking him against other players that maybe have a little bit more production at the college football level, but also have a lower ceiling, I think teams are going to be more drawn to a player like Williams who has the higher upside in the first round rather than a player that maybe they feel they can get equal production on day 2 somewhere.
Yeah, and he's a guy. My comp for him is actually Max Crosby coming out, just because Max then wasn't Max now, and he ran hot, and that's sort of how Mykel Williams plays. And if he's there in the middle of the first round and you're the Bears and the offensive linemen are off the board and you take him, you should be pretty pumped because now you have him opposite Montez Sweat and you get that edge rusher you were looking for. Ideally, you would get an offensive tackle, but that's sort of the first team that popped in my head. And in a place that Mykel can go, doesn't have to be the number 1, and can get his feet wet with Montez on the other side and allow him to sort of do his thing in one-on-one situations. All right, one last guy here. Out of Oregon. Oregon has some dudes as well. You mentioned Derek Harmon, who's going to get drafted pretty high. Josh Connerly Jr., the left tackle, we've talked about him. I mentioned Evan Stewart earlier, the wide receiver. Tez Johnson's the other wide receiver. Of course, Dylan Gabriel. He's going to be at the Senior Bowl trying to improve his draft stock. But I'm going to talk about Jordan Burch, defensive tackle. And I thought there was a chance he might come out last year. He didn't. My comp for him is Drake Jackson. Remember Drake Jackson out of USC? Got drafted in the second round.
Love Drake.
Yeah, and I think he was
like my number 20 player on my board. I love Drake coming out. Obviously hasn't worked out. Injuries played a role, but really talented player.
That's interesting because I remember talking to a scout during Drake's draft here saying, all right, what's the deal with Drake? Because it seems like he's not, and this isn't the case with just body type wise, that he reminds me of Jordan Burke, but I remember asking, what's the deal with Drake? Why isn't he on every single snap? And he said, here's the thing, he's going to get drafted higher than you think. I think he'll end up going to the second round because of the measurables, and you can coach those things up. And it's interesting that you liked him because the NFL teams agree with you. But Jordan Burch is that body type, but I think he's not, I wouldn't call him twitchy. He's a long strider, but he's incredibly powerful. He gets his hands in passing lanes. And I think we underestimate how important getting your hands up is if you're not getting home. Alfred Collins, by the way, he has 50 passes defended at the line of scrimmage. He gets his hands on balls to turn into interceptions, and those things are valuable. And you see a lot of that from Jordan Burch. And I'm excited to see more of him, but I think he ain't in the same conversation Twitch-wise if you're talking about Michael Williams, but he also lines up. He'll line up in 4-eye. They'll put him out wide. Occasionally, they'll put him inside over the guard. So there's some versatility there as well, and he's obviously a little bigger. But I like the sort of what he brings to the table in terms of being stout against the run, in terms of pushing the pocket, and in terms of getting the quarterback off the spot, either through pressure or through his ability to knock the ball down at the line of scrimmage because he has his eyes in the backfield.
He's on what I like to call the DJ Johnson rehabilitation program. DJ Johnson was a former 5-star recruit, came over from Miami, had played multiple positions, and turned himself into, I believe, a day 2 pick with the Ducks in his final season. Now he's playing with the Panthers. He's contributing. Jordan Birch was the number 1 rated edge rusher coming out of high school, number 11 overall prospect. He went to South Carolina, had good production there, but in the NIL era, everybody is available during the offseason. So Birch landed in Eugene, and he's been a really solid player for them. You talked about his ability to get in pass lanes when his rush does not get home. Well, that's easy for someone like Birch, who is listed at 6'6", 295 pounds, incredibly long athlete, has a lot of athletic potential. So he's somebody that is more than capable to impact pass lanes when his rush does not get home. 8.5 sacks this season. So, the production is there. This is not an incredibly raw player. He had just 7.5 sacks the prior 3 seasons. So you saw him the light bulb came on this year a little bit more for him. And I think you're going to see him taken probably comfortably on day 2 somewhere just because of the potential that he has, the size. You just can't teach it. One other player that I will mention on Oregon's defense who I think is really fun is the linebacker Bryce Betcher, I think is how you say his last name. He's a 2-way athlete. He walked on to the football team, but also plays baseball.
Right.
I talked about him with Brock Vereen lately for an article that's coming on CBSSports.com. He's just really fun. He's got that traditional Big Ten linebacker aesthetic, the high neck roll.
Yeah.
Somebody that's just all over the field. I think he may play center field for the baseball team. So,
I think that's right. Yeah.
So when you're
and he
watching
wears
them,
the neck roll when in center field, I heard.
Yeah, exactly.
Hardcore.
So when you do get a chance to see them play, obviously not this week because of the bye, but down the road, he's a player that I think a lot of fans are going to be introduced to because of the way that he plays the game.
Yeah, and again, that's the national stage, and you hope these players ball out that are healthy, like Denzel Burke and Jordan Birch, and you wish guys like Carson Beck had an opportunity to ball out. But either way, we'll be watching. That's it. That's all we got. There are your 12 guys. Write them down. Report back to us what you think. Or not. It's up to you. It's a holiday season. You can do what you want. A little programming note here, Josh. Next week, I think Rick is going to be back, as I mentioned at the top. So we'll see what happens there. Just one show, though, because it's Christmas next week. And, if you celebrate it, celebrate it. If you don't, enjoy the day off. But for now, episode 208 in the books. Thanks to Josh for filling in. I appreciate it, man. Thanks to Claire for producing. And thanks to all you guys who watch, listen, and comment. We'll see you next week.